right, everyone, welcome to another Curious Heart Society panel discussion. Curious Heart Society is a collective of certified coaches, and we've all come together and founded this company to help people all over the globe to support you, to guide you, to inspire you, to encourage you, to really build meaningful connections and to build the life of your dreams, to transform your lives in a positive way. We've come together to discuss patriarchy today. We are tackling this age-old topic here. Basically, I'm just going to give you a brief definition of patriarchy, and then we're going to get into some questions for our experts here. So, patriarchy refers to a set of systems and structures that have been established over centuries, as we know. And these systems dictate that men are the default leaders, the decision makers, and the providers, while women are often seen as playing a supportive role and secondary roles within society. Okay. And so basically, what we want to discuss today is how is patriarchy, the systems and structures of patriarchy, how is this affecting our clients? How is this system affecting us personally as individuals as well? How do traditional gender roles shape our clients' expectations in dating? We're going to start with Barb.
Thanks, Arielle. I love this question because it came up so much with all of my clients. So they come into this place of dating after being in relationships for 20, sometimes 30 years. And the last time they dated, the societal norm that they had is that women don't ask men out on dates. Men are basically the primary breadwinners. Most likely, if you have children, the woman will stay in the home while the man makes the money. So we're not so far off, and we're like 20 and sometimes 10, 20 years, 30 years from a societal norm that many of my clients had when they got married in their 20s, right? Which could be 25 to 30 years ago. So it definitely impacts my clients' expectations in dating because they come out, these women are very different. They're accomplished. They make a ton of money. And they have to revert to this place of being sort of a subordinate to the men who show up.
Right.
And it's a weird thing because on the one hand, the women that are my clients, they want to put their best foot forward. Yet they have to hold back because their best foot forward also says they have double degrees, they're CFO of a company, their net worth is potentially bigger than the person they're dating, but they dumb it down a little bit because those things, society, the role that they shaped growing up didn't accommodate for that, right? There was nothing that said if you end up being the primary breadwinner, which 25, 30 years ago wasn't necessarily always the case, then what do you do? And the only thing that did exist in those times was the superwoman. They do everything. They they clean the house, they raise the kids, they birth the kids, and they make big old salaries, and they're a good wife. And that's just not sustainable. And so the rule that was there in 80s and 90s is like, you're going to do everything. It's all going to be fine. And you're not going to burn out. And you'll have a partner who's just completely understanding. And so for the women, it's looking back at how those gender roles shaped their perception of how they should act in dating. And for men, it's a little bit split because men now, especially middle-aged men, have seen this, and some of them have understood it. Maybe they've been in the position where the person they were with was a primary breadwinner, but many men still feel that need to provide. Their ego gets bruised if they don't have that role. Or you have the extreme where men are looking for a nurse and a purse. And they're like, oh, well, I'm going to turn that norm on its head. I'm still going to be the man. I'm still going to be provide. But hey, she's got some money. We can go on vacations together. And I'm going to live in her big ass house.
Ka-ching.
Yeah, exactly. So I think what happens, especially for my clients who are mostly in middle age, it's a very confusing picture. So you have to really think about those norms that shaped you and decide whether or not they're ones that you adhere to today or not. That's my biggest takeaway of clients' expectations in dating.
Yeah, excellent points, Barb. I'm going to punt this over to Loretta. So, for Loretta, how do traditional gender roles shape our clients' expectations in dating? What are your thoughts on
Yeah, I actually think that this is huge, just like Barb said, but zooming in a little bit more to the dating aspect in particular, I know that when it comes to dating, size comes into play.
that?
For women, I hear a lot of the height thing being a really big deal. And when I've asked about it in the past, because as you know, we all used to be matchmakers, and that was one of the things that our clients would always ask about. That's one of the things that are a priority for them is height for our female clients. And when asking why this is something that's important to them, they say it's because they want to feel protected. So that's definitely very much a feminine, masculine sort of thing, or female, male sort of thing. And when it came to our male clients, size also plays a role sometimes too.
Yep.
And oftentimes money comes into play as well. Our female clients want their potential person to make an X amount of dollars. And then the opposite sometimes is true for the men. They don't care so much about their dates making a ton of money, or would prefer that they weren't super high level, successful, that kind of thing. I find that men want, for the most part, their dates to be agreeable and just fun and flirty and friendly. And that was something that is very much masculine men kind of thing when I had male clients. And then for the females, it was a lot of like, I want to feel like this person is able to take charge. This person's able to take initiative. I don't want someone who's passive. I want somebody who can be a leader, that kind of thing. These are all very, so yeah, it definitely really influences our expectations in dating for sure. And actually, I pulled up an article that was, let me see here. It is a survey, an online survey of 818 men. I think this was done in 2015. It was conducted by Heart Research Associates. And in talking about the difference of what men want in a daughter and a wife.
Mm-hmm.
And so when it came to independent, 66% of men wanted their daughters to be independent, but guess how many for their wives?
Oh, how many?
34. 34. 48%
Wow.
of men, 48% of men wanted their daughters to be strong versus 28% of men wanting their wives to be strong.
Wow.
But then you get to sweet. How many, what would you say percentage of men wanted their daughters to be sweet?
30?
19.
Mm.
Versus a wife to be sweet is 34%. And
Wow.
attractive. Guess how many men wanted their daughters to be attractive?
10%.
Yep, 11%.
Wow.
But what about a wife?
60.
72.
45%.
Okay.
So just this is very interesting when we're thinking about patriarchy.
Yeah, absolutely. That is incredible, Loretta, that you bring that study up. And so, going back to you, Barb, when you hear those, what do you think is going on in a man's brain that where there's that disconnect between what they're wanting for the daughters versus what they're wanting for their wives? Is there some kind of indication there that men are acutely aware of the ways in which patriarchy negatively affects women? And that relationship, that connection that they have with their daughters, are kind of safeguarding them, whereas with their wives, they're falling into kind of that patriarchal. So tell me what your thoughts are about that, Barb.
Well, I think especially with men who have daughters, they're towing the line on sort of on both sides, right? On the one hand, they want to take advantage of the role that they're already in, which is the patriarchal one. They may be the head of the household and they need to maintain that status and control. But on the other hand, they don't want their daughter to succumb to the same thing.
Yeah.
So it's very interesting, that stat, because it comes as a layer of protection, but truly the way that's going to pan out is if they model their family system in a way that brings their daughter up as well.
Mm-hmm.
So it's twofold, meaning, oh, I don't want my daughter to do that, but honey, get some dinner ready for us. You know, it's like,
Yeah, for sure.
boom,
Yep.
right?
Yeah,
So it's
definitely.
surfacey, which in my mind is what I understand about the patriarchy, especially when you think about the white male. Most men have been in this position for so long, they don't even know what their biases are.
Yep.
Exactly.
So whereas women, people of color, are always assimilating in some form or fashion to adhere to the rules of the patriarchal reign.
Yes.
It's starting to change, but it's so embedded into our bodies and systems and cells that it's very, very difficult. So the only thing that you can do is model behavior that changes that. And so as much as women want to do it on their own, they can't do it without men who will put us on that pedestal to show, I absolutely support her and I want her to be equal. I want her to be an equal partner. I want her to be as strong as me. And I don't care how much money she or I makes.
Mm-hmm.
And so those are the models that have to be up there so that other men are like, oh, I kind of thought that too. But I was hanging out in the bar with the other guys and playing football and had to like keep up with the Joneses.
Right. Absolutely.
So yeah, it's a very
Great point.
delicate balance. And I think it's very difficult for men to come out of it because other men don't necessarily condone that behavior either.
Yeah, you bring up an excellent point about this, Barb, because men have to have that mental and emotional shift and have to be able to hold each other accountable in that shift as well. You're absolutely correct. We hear a lot about men feeling the pressure from their friends, from their male counterpoints, from parts, and from their family members, their male family members, to uphold that structure and those internal systems as well. And Loretta, I'm curious to hear, do you have any additional thoughts on the study that you just brought up about the differences between what men are wanting for their daughters versus their wives?
Yeah, I just thought it was so interesting. And even thinking about my own life as a kid, I remember my dad always wanting my mom to be a stay-at-home mom. Like he wanted someone around all the time for his kids. And on some level, sometimes he talks about it, and I think that he still kind of feels that way. Like, oh, it's kind of a shame that, that you guys grew up with two parents working. But what's interesting is my dad always encouraged my sister and I to be successful. He always cared about schooling and grades and jobs and our incomes. So I just think that it's just very interesting. And as we're talking about all of this patriarchy stuff, I do often wonder how much of it is biological too. Because even though I don't think that I don't think one gender is better than the other. I do think that we need each other, but I do think we're very different. We're built differently. And so perhaps our patriarchal society, I wonder how much of that is because of that. I don't think it's all because of biology, historically. I don't know. That's something that I thought about. And it's just wondering if you guys have any thoughts on that.
Definitely, definitely. And we bring up an excellent point because oftentimes when we have these types of discussions, we do inevitably speak to biological differences and neurochemical differences between men and women. The 40-hour work week, how our days are structured, and all of that is
Yeah.
very much in alignment with a man's hormonal system. A man has a full hormonal cycle in a 24-hour period. And so when you think about it, I want you to think about the hormonal phases as winter, spring, summer, and fall. A woman's hormonal cycle happens within a 28-day period. And so we have a full week of winter, we have a full week of spring, summer, and fall. And so when we're having our hormonal changes, that means that our winter cycle, which is when we are actually on our menstrual cycle, when we are actually on our period, that is our winter. We are supposed to be able to completely disconnect, shut down. We are supposed to rest and go within to reflect. That is our time to really pour into ourselves, to not be bothered by other people, situations, to keep our stress levels really low, and things of that nature. I want you to then consider the male cycle, right? When he is in his winter at nighttime, when he gets to sleep, he's in his hormonal winter. And so he actually gets to disconnect. He gets to have that recharging type of deep rest. He's waking up in his spring. So those morning hours where he is preparing for work, he's in his spring hormonal cycle. His energy's coming online. He's starting to rev up. And the bulk of his workday, he's in his summer cycle at peak energy. And then when the evening starts and he's wrapping things up, he's in his fall preparing for winter. So you can see how even how we've structured the manner in which we work is specifically structured to the male chemical and hormonal cycle. So it is really built for him. Whereas if you are a woman and you are going through these hormonal fluctuations, you have to tend to the children, work, tend to your husband, and go, and do all the things. You don't get those periods of rest in winter and your fall season of starting to wrap up projects and wrap things up and gear down. We don't get that. So you can clearly see how patriarchal systems really is devastating to the female system and is very abusive to the female system. And this is why oftentimes in today's world, we can see how women's hormones are like all over the place. Because we do not get to honor our natural rhythm and our natural cycles, right?
Yeah. That's so interesting.
Yeah.
So unfair.
It is. But also to your point, Loretta, both you and Barb make excellent points here because understanding that this is why men are in a position to work, to be the workers, to be the providers. And that is biological for them to be in that because another interesting fact is that testosterone, men have 16 to upwards of 30 times the testosterone of the average woman. And testosterone is protective against stress. Not only is the system geared perfectly for the male hormonal system, but they have a sex hormone chemical that actually protects them from stress that we do not possess high levels of. So not only are we completely out of whack with our jobs and all of that, but we do not have the sex hormones, the neurochemical system to protect ourselves from all of that productivity. Yeah. Testosterone makes them productive and it makes them able to tolerate high levels of stress for prolonged amounts of time. You see?
Yeah. And take bigger risks probably too, I imagine.
Absolutely. Because testosterone also makes them more competitive, more dominant, more aggressive. You see? Yep. So all of those traits are in alignment with their chemical composition. So.
Okay. So my husband, basically what I got is my husband can handle more stress.
That's right.
I will help him get to, no, just kidding.
Yes. Right. And keeping that in mind, we see our female clients coming in who are trying to utilize all of their testosterone to build and run empires, right? And do all of this. And so oftentimes we do see women coming in who are like, I'm exhausted. Well, yeah, that's because you've been acting in a way that is actually not natural to your system, but is in ways that you can, if you want to deplete your testosterone reserves, you can absolutely do that. But understanding for women, it's not that we are wanting you to change. It's that we want you to be aware that there will be consequences to your energy levels and to your hormonal cycles if you are going to fashion your life in the way of the male, of how he's structured and how he has to do things. Just be aware of that so that way perhaps our clients can increase their self-care and increase these other things to kind of balance that out, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Use this knowledge to your advantage.
Absolutely. Yeah,
Sure.
absolutely.
Yeah.
So, okay, awesome. And the next question that I'd like to pose to you, to both of you experts, is how do power dynamics in relationships reflect like broader patriarchal structures? So another way that I'll ask that is, how do traditional power dynamics affect things like communication, conflict resolution, overall relationship health? And so I'll go to you, Barb, and start with you. Do you have any thoughts on this?
Yeah. So I think of the power dynamics that were in my marriage. So I was married for a very long time, and we entered the relationship more or less as equals. And then the power dynamic shifted when I decided to stay home with the kids, and my ex became the primary breadwinner. And I knew that he had a finance degree and I had an English degree. So we both agreed, yeah, you're better with the numbers and I'm better with the writing. Then we evolved to a space where I actually was a lot better at finances than I thought. Right. And I sort of proved myself, but I'd always just like, oh, it's okay. At the point that we separated and divorced, it turned out that I had just as much financial information, to the point where my ex would be surprised at how smart I was when coming into negotiations. Now, does he whip up a much better Excel spreadsheet than me? Absolutely. Has he spent more time in finance than me? Absolutely. Can he come up with those numbers quickly? Absolutely. But because it's complicated, because when you're in a relationship and it's an interdependent relation, not a codependent relation, then you defer to the other and you sort of divide and conquer and you're like, okay, well, I trust you in those decisions. But as the power dynamic shifted and I had to become much more independent, I came to this place where I realized that I had more power than I realized. But because I had assumed the role of the person who did not make the money and who did not know as much about finances, I sat in a space, it's like, oh, he'll take care of it, it's fine. But then when you come out of that system and you have to more or less fend for yourself as a single person, then the power dynamic shifted. And to some degree, sometimes people feel threatened by that. You're like, oh my gosh, she knows more than I thought.
Right.
And that doesn't just happen in relationships, it also happens in the workspace, right? So definitely power dynamics in the workspace where you, as a female, may speak up and the man in the room may not like you speaking up, right? And so what I find as a woman is that too often I default to allow the power dynamic to just see itself through, because I don't want to be in conflict, right?
Yeah.
So in my mind, the power dynamic is one that's been there for a long time. And I also came from a patriarchal structured home, although even though my dad was the primary breadwinner, my mom was like chief operating officer. And so he didn't mess with her. And so there was, even though he brought the money in, she brought in the structure to the family. And then that dynamic changed again, and the way they treated the sons in the family versus the daughters in the family. Right. So then there was just these defaulted rules that would come in. And so when we think about from the family power dynamic and then the relationship power dynamic, and then there's a work power dynamic, there's still a hint of the hierarchical structure that impacts a woman, especially for me at my age, over the decades that I've lived. It's something that I've had to succumb to. It's something that I've had to adhere to for many, many years, only to find that I then had to move out of that dynamic to take care of myself on my own. So it's very prominent in all of these power dynamics. The question is, especially with my clients, like, is it in you to do these things or not? Are you doing them because you're forced to do them? Are you doing them because it's easier to do them? So how does that power dynamic sit with you? With some people, they're like, you know what? I don't even want to deal with any of that stuff. Let them do it. I'm good. And others, it's like, oh, it hurts. Your ego gets touched and you're like, I can't handle it. I don't want that person to do all of it for me. I need to do part of it. I need to have some skin in the game. or I'm just taking it because I want all the control. So it's really tricky because you still have the umbrella of the patriarchy that influences how you work through those power dynamics. But in my mind, there's different phases of it for me, and there's different categories of it for me. Am I in the place where I have the ultimate power dynamic and I'm ruling the world and I'm going to be the next president of the United States? Absolutely not. I don't want that. But it exists, and those types of things will change the patriarchal structure.
Right.
You know?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Excellent points there, because I love this, Barb, that you're speaking about that internal conflict that oftentimes we all bump up against at some point in our lives with that. And then that importance of being able to toggle between both of those energy of having those energies developed within internally. And so you're not so much like a fish out of water when you experience something that calls for a different type of energy to be expressed, right? And so I love how you hit on all of those points. And Loretta, I really want to pick your brain about this, and what are your thoughts on this? So when you think about that, how do those traditional power dynamics affect things like communication, conflict resolution, overall relationship health? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I don't think it's a one size fits all. I think that what's great about, what we know, like information and being able to decide and have free will and be in a country where there's so much freedom, we can really decide what will work best for us in terms of that like power dynamic in a relationship. Some men love strong women. Maybe they were raised by strong women. They want a woman that's opinionated, maybe not necessarily aggressive or competitive, right? Because I don't know who wants competition in a relationship, right? But maybe some men really respect their wives or their woman to have opinions. And also, I think that religion also plays a part too. I know for some people who are religious, I know some women who really don't mind being in the supportive role. It doesn't mean that it's a less of a role. It just means that they don't mind their husband being at the forefront of their family, but they are advisors, maybe. So I just think that what's great is that we can really create it and build it to what we want it to look like. And it's important when you're in the dating phase, even before you start dating, to ask yourself, really, what kind of a partner do I want? Men or women? Like, what kind of a partner do I want? Do I want somebody who respects my opinions? Some days I don't want to make decisions. I'm tired. I want my husband to
Absolutely.
make a decision. And I'll say it too. Can you just decide for us? So I think that it really is individually dependent, but definitely in terms of a patriarchal structure, I think that when people start to have children, it can get a little bit complicated. We have all these terms now like mother load, which is that invisible load that women carry. Just because I think our brains are wired a little bit differently too. We have more of a web thinking, so we're able to see a lot of different things, whereas for the male brain, it's more focused. And so there's just this mother load. There's this load, invisible load that women carry from just thinking about all the things and taking into account all of the different things that we have to sometimes to manage a household. And so what's really important here is just to communicate in terms of like power dynamics, is to be able to feel like you can communicate with your partner. If you need more help, if you need more support, I really think that communication is key for balancing that power dynamic and for being able to create it to what you want it to look like for your personal family.
Yeah, absolutely. That's an excellent point, Loretta. I love how you're emphasizing that people do have the power to choose and customized, even though we're all still living within this patriarchal structure as individuals and individual families, family systems, we can choose. And it's brilliant that you're speaking to that, how important it is for people within the dating space to know themselves, know that about themselves, what aspect they're leaning more into. That way they are very clear on what type of partner best suits them. So I love that you spoke about that, because I think that's an element that's oftentimes missed with the
Yeah.
clients that are coming into us. It's not something they think a lot about. And so that's
Right.
wonderful.
And maybe even asking some questions to your date. What was it like for you growing up? What are your parents like?
Yeah.
What are your relationships with them like? Just asking curious questions
Yes.
of what they think. And oftentimes you can you can tell within the first few dates how this person thinks when it comes to power dynamics and whether or not they want to be the leader and they want to wear the pants and they want to, or is this person a little bit more be more inclusive of me and my feelings, my thoughts. But everybody's different. Some women really like that. They like being led and just not having to do or think. That's totally fine too. It's just so individual.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Excellent points. And that brings me to our final question here today. So, my last question would be, how do you see these patriarchal structures playing out within your families? And if you have any stories about yourself as an individual, how that affected the relationship between your mother and father, between siblings, yourself and your siblings, and things of that nature. And I'd like to start with Barb on this. And so, Barbara, does anything come to mind when you're thinking of how the patriarchy has affected your family structure and affected your upbringing and your program?
Absolutely. So I grew up the youngest of seven, and I had an oldest brother, and grew up just watching my parents just spoil him rotten.
Yes.
He could do no wrong ever. The girls weren't allowed to date, but the boys would bring their girlfriends over. My parents even pushed couches together so that my brother could bring his girlfriend home and sleep with her, like in the living room. And we're like, what is going on? And it was more golden son, because they didn't actually quite do that with the other sons that they had, but it was the golden son. He was going to be successful. They're just going to give him, they were just yes, yes, yes to everything. And for us, that was the golden son, the patriarchal structure. And then, of course, the treatment of how the girls in the family were treated versus the boys in the family were treated. And so the layer of protection was, we were first generation immigrants to the country. Some of us were born in the Philippines, some of us were born in the US. And so my parents would make sure that we were protected and not harmed in any way. So we could not have boyfriends, could not have public boyfriends. Of course, we had private ones. And my sister, I think, brought my brother to a prom because that's just what they did. And so we were not, as females, encouraged to even date. However, we were encouraged to do really well in school, to perform, to excel, to do our best academically always, because school was the thing that was going to bring us from wherever we were in terms of economic level to the next level. So we pushed there, and I happened to push in the business world. So I came from this really crazy place, the duality of being first generation female person of color that had to assimilate, but then also on the other side, not understanding my power of what I could do and how I could push the boundaries a little bit on the other side. So there was always a little bit of me that wasn't able to truly shine because of the family system I grew up in, as well as the norms of where I was. Thankfully, I was in a lot of organizations where women were at the head, but then of course I was in many organizations where it was predominantly men. I worked in the 90s, I worked for a video game company, or like a PC gaming company, and it was all men. Man. And it was a male-driven industry. All the men were buying the games, all the men were building the games, and there was just a small group of us women who were in there doing marketing and PR. it was very obvious that was not going to be a place that I could be successful because I just wasn't, that wasn't my mind frame. I didn't want to ultimately build giant robot combat games and person shooter games. I knew I could only be so successful. Thankfully, I did have a boss that finally gave me a girl-oriented game that we could break into that market, but it never really was successful because that particular genre was always going to be male dominated. Which brings me to, I know you were talking about societal and familiar, but it brings back the biology piece, right? So we are going to be best where our natural inclination is, right? If my natural inclination is one of caring, nurturing, supporting, that's probably where I'm going to do my best. If my natural inclination is methodical, numbers oriented, whatever, for whatever way, then that's where I do my best. And I think I tend towards the biology of nurturing, supporting, creating, whereas some women are more towards the methodological, science-based piece. But that piece wasn't always heralded prior to STEM programs, wasn't always heralded in the traditional sense. So who knows, maybe had that been something that I knew that was possible for me when I was growing up, maybe I would have been in the sciences more. But I can't make that distinction because I ended up being more in the creative aspects. And that was something that my biology just did really well in. So it's hard to say nature versus nurture, but I know for a fact that the nurture had a ceiling on it. There's only so far that I could go. And at the time I was okay with it. Now I'm like, well, it could have been endless possibilities. And of course, for my own kids, I'm like, you can do anything you want. You could be a fireman as a woman, go for it. That had to evolve over time. It wasn't something that I was born into. It's definitely born into very traditional roles and a relatively happy family in those roles.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Great. Thank you for sharing your story, Barb.
Sure.
That's amazing. And Loretta, I'm curious for you, how did the patriarchal structure affect your family dynamics, and your relationships within your family?
Yeah, I touched on this a little bit earlier. My mom actually, she had two other sisters and one brother. And so in her family, that wasn't really an issue. They respected the girls as much as the boy. But in my dad's family, he's one of six, and three girls and three boys. And my mom has always shared with me that the girls in that family were treated less than. They weren't given the same opportunities that the guys were given. I know the boys, they all got to come to America for pharmacy school. All three of them are pharmacists, and the girls, not so much. So there definitely was inequality there. But I have a sister. So in my little family growing up, my dad, I never felt any of that. But like I said, it's interesting because my dad always encouraged my mom to stay home. He always wanted my mom to stop working. And I am so grateful. And I really respect and admire my mom so much for not bending and just doing what he wanted. It was very important for her to make her own money. It was very important for her to be independent. My mom is really smart. In Taiwan, you have to test into colleges. My mom she's just really smart. And so I'm so glad that she just continued pursuing and doing what she wanted to do with her career and with that part of her life. I'm just so glad that she didn't cave. But my dad really tried to pressure her to stay home. But it's just interesting that he always encouraged my sister and I to go to school and be successful and all of these things. But it's also interesting in thinking about guys that I've dated in my past. My dad, there were some that he would accept and some that he wouldn't. And it had a lot to do, I think, with those gender things, those patriarchal ideas. He had to make good money, go to a good school, like all of those things, have a good career. It just interesting. But I never felt personally like there was any sort of limit or cap or anything like that, which I'm really grateful for. But yeah, my mom has always, I think because my mom stood her ground, my sister and I are both very independent, and we both grew up like not wanting to depend on a man
Yeah.
and wanting to just be our own people. And so I really am grateful to her for that.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's amazing. And so do you know much about your mother's upbringing that kind of forged her into the type of person who could stand her ground?
Yeah, I think it's because it was a family of three girls and one boy, and they didn't have any. My grandparents are so great. They're both like teachers, and even my grandma, she was a teacher, so she worked. So they just, they raised their daughters to be independent and smart and all those things. So yeah.
Amazing.
Mhm.
Amazing. Great.
Yeah. I'm curious about your family, actually, Arielle.
Yes, yes. Okay, so yeah, so it's an interesting thing because Barb, I really connect with you and your story about how you grew up, how those patriarchal systems were so like deeply implanted, embedded in the minds of the consciousness of your parents, and how that came down to you and your siblings and things of that nature. Because my background, of course, having a Korean matriarch over my family and those deep embedded, because it's interesting that you, myself, and Loretta are all coming from an Asian background, and me being more having more African blood than Asian blood, but being in a household raised with a Korean matriarch and not Black men in the house. And so it really lended itself to this interesting dynamic. But yes, the boys in my family are definitely held in high esteem. And in traditional Korean culture, especially your firstborn son is like hangs the moon and stars, right? And so that's the kid that's going to get all the resources and the opportunities and is going to be spoiled to death, set up for the highest levels of success. And no matter what they do, wrong or incorrectly, all is forgiven and nothing's held over their head. There are no real consequences. And what I've come to understand in studying and really observing those dynamics in families is that it really weakens men, right? It really ends up building men who are entitled, men who lack self awareness, men who have a very difficult time coming to understand that there are actually consequences for poor behavior once they become adults and things of that nature. So seeing that play out in within my grandmother's four children, two girls and two boys, and then how she raised her daughters and how much pressure she put them under to be perfect and to achieve and to be beautiful and to all of these things. And it's interesting because the two girls turned out to be highly capable, to be driven and ambitious, and to be resilient. They've both been through extreme challenges and trauma and all of that, but they've also just come out of that, put their heads down, like, nope, I got to keep going and got to make something happen. And it's interesting to think about how the sons turned out and how many challenges that they have had out in the real world. And so when I think about that, when it comes to my mother, she would swear to you that she does not have those internal patriarchal dynamics, but she absolutely adopted that. And when I look at how I was raised versus how my little brother was raised, it's that same dynamic. And me as the girl, I had a lot of pressure placed on me to perform, to be perfect, to have an excellent public face, to really excel in everything that I possibly can, and also not complain. And also, it's interesting because the women are kind of X'd out. You can't really have many needs. You're forgotten because all of the time and energy and resources and everything are going to the boys. And so you're fed to the wolves at a very early age, and it's like a sink or swim type of situation. And the boys usually also, what I've noticed is that the boys usually stay pretty connected to the mother and generally stay pretty close to home and rely heavily on the family, even well into adulthood, where the women tend to leave the household at earlier ages. They're far more independent at earlier ages and that sort of thing because of how they're raised. And that very much carried over for myself and my little brother. Whereas I can see very clearly that my brother is floundering in areas that I dare not and never have, and that sort of thing because of those. So it's interesting. I say all of that to say that while there's a lot of damage and mostly emotional damage that came out of being a girl within a patriarchal household, there's emotional damage that comes from that because that relationship between a mother and their daughter is very important to that daughter's development. And so when that's not a close, integral, supportive type of relationship, we really take on a lot of damage from that. However, in ways that it tends to benefit us is that we do come out of those households being highly capable and we have a lot going for us. And we tend to not struggle in the ways that our male counterparts do end up struggling and in that. So I can see pros and cons coming out of that. Yeah. Do you have anything that you'd like to say about that? Or is there any connectivity points there for you?
Absolutely. And it's interesting as you talk about it, because you and I, very similar Asian upbringing, structures, dynamics, influence. What's interesting, if you think about it and just go as sort of the macro level of all of this, what happens is this feeling of enoughness, especially with girls, it's almost like it's never enough because to some degree, girls have to outperform to be able to get into the same spots where the patriarchy has left a spot for the man that's capable enough.
Yep.
Man that golfs with the guy, the man whose dad has been in the company forever. And so it's not the same. And so women tend to have to do way more to get similar roles. And where that comes out, because if we wrap this back to this idea of relationships and dating and those dynamics, I'll call it a hangover, right? So here you are, this woman, you're working your ass off. It's never enough. You have to really achieve and overachieve and do better so that you can get those roles. So you get all the way up there, and then from a career perspective, and then you have to go ratchet back down from a relationship perspective. Okay, I have to look beautiful. I have to put on makeup. I have to wear a nice dress because that's how people are going to find me attractive. So we're constantly toggling to the different parts of this big macro, whatever you call it, structure of the patriarchy to meet all of our needs.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where it comes back to relationships and dating, because we've had to, I'm over exaggerating. Not every woman does everything, but many women feel like they have to be able to fit in the different parts of society to meet our needs, both on a career aspiration perspective, on a friendship relationship perspective, and then on an intimate relationship perspective. So the picture gets very confusing. And what happens? Biologically, we're exhausted.
Yes. Absolutely.
Like, I don't know, I've done it all. It doesn't really matter. And here I am, back to my metaphor. I'm there with my bags.
Yeah.
Ready to go, but the bus is all left because I didn't quite fit the need of whatever that part of the structure fits me. We tell our clients, be authentic, be dynamic, be this, be that. And sometimes we have to just be with what is, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And what is, I am who I am because of my social norms, because of the life that I lived that was influenced by my family, by the patriarchal norms. And I'm coming to this place where I'm discovering who I am today and keeping these aspects of me that I love about myself and letting go of the ones that don't. And when we move into this phase of dating and relationships, who you are and what you own about yourself is probably the most important thing. Regardless of whether you're under the patriarchy or coming out of the patriarchy, do you like who you are today? And are you going to be okay with what that other person has to offer for you, whether they're set in that patriarchal structure and you're like, I'm okay with that. That is okay too. I am not going to be the judge and jury of how somebody wants to be in relationship. It's more about, I'm going to own my stuff. And if you own your stuff, then you can live within these hierarchies with the acceptance of what is.
I love that. I love that. I relate to that so heavy. Thank you, Barb. You are clearly an expert within these relationship dynamics, within dating relationships. I know also that you are an absolute badass in the realms of grief and loss and all of that as well. And you change the lives of your clients on a regular basis. And I know that your clients are just so grateful and thankful that you have entered their lives. And I want to close this out today and to really encourage our listeners, our viewers. Thank you so much for your loyalty. First of all, thank you for taking the time out and spending some time with us on this topic. We encourage you to think about this. Think about the patriarchy, how it has affected you, how it has programmed you. And we want you to, in the safety of your own space, the safety of people around you who actually support you and love you and seek to understand you, to question everything, right? Question what you believe to be true about yourself in terms of the patriarchy, how you are making decisions and the actions that you're taking. Question these things, right? And really give yourself the space to evolve. Also, give yourself the grace to check out when you need to, okay? When you need some you time and you need to just let all of those hats fall to the ground and all of that as well. And we just encourage you to find your power and to remain within your power, whatever that looks like to you. So we thank you again for tuning in and joining us. And until our next discussion, much love to all of you. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.